Tonight, we will walk slowly across cobblestones still damp from an evening rain. The city is Amsterdam. The year is somewhere between 1640 and 1650. The air is cool, but not biting. It smells faintly of the sea, of distant ports where ships unload cinnamon, tea, silk, and porcelain. By day, this city hums with the creak of masts, the slap of ropes, and the chatter of merchants bargaining over goods from across the globe. But now, the noise has faded. The market stalls have emptied. Only the occasional lantern sways in the breeze, its reflection stretching across the dark water of the canal. You walk slowly along the water's edge. Somewhere far off, a lone dog barks once, then falls silent. From a window above a shop, a candle flickers briefly before the room goes dark. The air feels still, as if the city itself is holding its breath. Ahead, you see a tall, narrow house, leaning slightly as though whispering to its neighbors. Light spills faintly from a window near the top. Inside, a man works long after the city has gone to sleep. This is the home and the studio of Rembrandt Harmensoen van Rijn. You step inside and the air changes. It is warmer here, thick with the scent of linseed oil, beeswax, and the faint metallic tang of ground pigments. The flicker of a dozen candles glows against dark wooden beams. Every shadow feels deliberate, like one of his paintings come to life. The room feels alive with objects. A copper helmet with a dent in its crown sits beside a soft velvet cloak. On a high shelf, a seashell catches the light, its spiral gleaming. An hourglass, a lute missing one string, a painted mask from faraway lands. Rembrandt gathers these not as decoration, but as inspiration, props for sitters, or details in a larger scene. You notice that nothing here is pristine. The rug beneath your feet is worn from years of pacing. The table is stained with the ghostly rings of paint pots set down in moments of distraction. Even the walls, plastered decades ago, have hairline cracks where the house has shifted. It is imperfect, but deeply alive, much like his paintings. In the corner, you see a large press for making etchings, one of the tools that made his prints famous across Europe. Copper plates lean against the wall, some still bearing the ghost of ink. Printmaking allowed his art to travel far beyond Amsterdam, to Paris, to London, to the courts of kings. He greets you with a small smile. His hair, light brown with touches of gold, curls around his face. His eyes are deep-set, keen and patient, the kind of eyes that have studied thousands of faces and never stop being curious. He begins speaking in a low, even tone about his beginnings in Leiden, where he was born in 1606. He was the 9th child of a miller, Harmen, and his wife Neildgen, a baker's daughter. In those days, large families were common, and each child was expected to contribute to the family trade. But from a young age, Rembrandt's fascination was not in the mill or the bakery, but in the way sunlight struck a wall or the deep folds of an old man's face. His parents, seeing his interest, sent him to study at the Latin school in Leiden, an unusual opportunity for a miller's son. There, he learned not only reading and writing, but history, scripture, and the great stories of the ancient world. At 14, he was apprenticed to Jacob van Swanenburg, a local painter who had spent years in Italy. From him, Rembrandt learned the basics: how to prepare panels, grind pigments, and arrange figures in a composition. For a brief time, he enrolled at the University of Leiden, but lectures could not hold him the way art could. Soon, he left formal studies behind and apprenticed under Peter Lasman in Amsterdam, a master known for his dramatic biblical scenes. From Lasman, he learned the importance of telling a story through an image. By the time he returned to Leiden in his early 20s, Rembrandt was already attracting commissions. Within a few years, he moved to Amsterdam, then the thriving heart of the Dutch Republic, where his reputation grew quickly. Amsterdam in those years was a place of contrasts. Wealthy merchant homes rose beside narrow alleys where sailors lodged between voyages. Ships from the East Indies unloaded chests of porcelain, bolts of silk, jars of spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, pepper, scents that drifted through the streets. There were printing houses, map makers, and bustling markets. It was a place where art was not only for the nobility, but for the merchant class who wanted to display their success. Rembrandt's early Amsterdam years were filled with promise. He took on apprentices, among them Ferdinand Bol and Govert Flink, who would later have their own celebrated careers. He married Saskia van Eulenburg, the cousin of a prominent art dealer. Their union brought him both love and valuable connections to wealthy patrons. But tragedy was never far. Saskia bore 4 children. Only their son Titus survived past infancy. Her death in 1642, the same year Rembrandt completed the Night Watch, left him devastated. Now, he gestures toward the window where the canal glimmers faintly. The 17th century was a time of great prosperity for the Netherlands. The Dutch East India Company brought goods and wealth from Asia. Middle-class merchants, scholars, and civic leaders wanted portraits to hang in their homes and meeting halls. It was an age when art flourished, but it was also competitive. Painters like Frans Hals and Jan Levens were winning patrons. Rembrandt, though, had something rare, a way of painting that felt human, intimate, and truthful. He turns back to the easel, where a fresh canvas waits. Its surface is taut, the weave faintly visible in the candlelight. He begins with the imprimatura, a thin wash of earthy brown pigment, raw umber mixed with linseed oil, brushed over the canvas to soften the brightness of the raw fabric. This, he explains, is the stage where the painter lays down the foundation for light and shadow. He talks about chiaroscuro, the technique of using strong contrasts to create the illusion of volume. While he learned much from the Italian master Caravaggio, he adapted it to the softer, more diffuse light of the north. With a fine brush, he sketches the rough outlines of the sitter, a curve of the head, the slope of the shoulders, the suggestion of clothing. These marks are not rigid. They are guides to be adjusted as the painting grows. He pauses to show you his palette, lead tin yellow, bright and warm, perfect for highlights, vermilion, a deep red made from cinnabar, ultramarine, the most precious blue, ground from lapis lazuli, imported from Afghanistan, more expensive than gold, bone black, made from charred animal bones to create deep shadows. Some colors, he explains, were bought from apothecaries, kept in small paper packets until he ground them into powder with a mueller and stone. Others were imported at great expense, meaning every stroke had to count. He shows you a small jar of verdigris, a green made by exposing copper plates to vinegar and sealing them in a pot until corrosion formed. It has a soft, almost dusty glow in the candlelight. The brushes, made of hog bristle, vary from broad and sturdy for sweeping strokes to fine and pointed for delicate detail. The handles are long, allowing him to stand back from the canvas and see the whole composition as he works. He demonstrates how he holds the brush loosely, letting the bristles almost dance over the surface rather than pressing them flat. Pressure, he says, is the enemy of grace. As he works, he tells you his philosophy. A painting should not flatter. It should not be perfect in a way that erases life. He points to a self-portrait drying nearby. The skin is not smooth like porcelain. It has texture, tiny imperfections, the marks of living. The truth, he says softly, is more beautiful than the mask. He speaks of studying the masters, Titian's colors, Rubens' movement, Caravaggio's drama, but also of ignoring them when necessary. You must know the rules before you can break them. And now, he begins to tell you the stories behind his works. Rembrandt dips his brush in a deep oceanic blue, the color of a gathering storm. He tells you of a canvas he once painted in Leiden, just a year after moving to Amsterdam, the storm on the Sea of Galilee. It was his only seascape, yet it carries the drama of a man who understood storms in more ways than one. The scene is taken from the Gospel of Mark. A fishing boat, small and fragile against a vast heaving sea, struggles under the weight of a sudden squall. Dark clouds press low, and white foam lashes against the hull. In the center, Christ rises amid the chaos, his face calm as he rebukes the wind. But there is something else. Rembrandt smiles faintly. He painted himself into the scene. If you look closely at the figures clinging to the ropes and rigging, one man turns toward the viewer with wide, desperate eyes. That is Rembrandt, caught in the tempest. When he speaks of it, his voice softens. He says the sea is not merely water. It is the uncertainty of life, the suddenness of loss, the way events can overturn you in an instant. and perhaps that is why he never painted the sea again. The storm for him was never just in the sky. He cleansed his brush, dipping it in a small jar of linseed oil before telling you about Bathsheba at her bath. Painted in 1654, in a time when his finances were unraveling and his reputation with some patrons was fading, this work remains one of his most intimate portrayals of the human form. It shows Bathsheba at the moment she receives King David's letter. She sits, partially draped in a soft linen, her body luminous against a dark background. The skin is rendered with a tenderness that feels almost fragile, warm shadows pooling in the folds of her flesh, light catching gently on her shoulder. The model, scholars believe, was Hendrikier Stoffels, his partner after Saskia's death. By then, Hendrikier had moved into his home, a choice that drew whispers and moral judgment from the church council. But in this painting, there is no shame, only dignity, contemplation, and a quiet sorrow. Bathsheba's gaze is not toward the viewer, it is inward, lost in the weight of an impossible decision. Rembrandt lingers here, telling you that painting a body is easy. Anyone can learn to render skin. Painting a soul, though, that takes years of looking, listening, and loving without condition. As the candle burns lower, he recalls the Jewish bride. He painted it in his later years, a time when money was scarce and commissions fewer. The identity of the couple remains debated. Some think they are a father and daughter from the Old Testament. Others say they are a bride and groom from Amsterdam's Jewish community. What is certain is the tenderness. The man's hand rests gently on the woman's chest, over her heart. Her hand in turn touches his, sealing the gesture. There is no ostentation, no theatrical backdrop, just two figures wrapped in warm, layered color, illuminated as if by love itself. Rembrandt's strokes here are thick, textured, almost sculptural. The gold embroidery of the sleeves seems to lift from the canvas, yet it is not the detail that makes it great. It is the stillness. Two lives bound together in mutual trust, painted by a man who had seen the fragility of human connection and chose to honor it in paint. He tells you he often sat and stared at the work for long stretches, painting slowly as though afraid to disturb the couple's quiet moment. He leans against the table now, eyes half closed, as if picturing another canvas, the return of the prodigal son. It is one of his final works, painted when age had bent his shoulders and his circle of friends had thinned. The scene comes from the parable in the Gospel of Luke. A ragged young man kneels before his father, his head bowed against the older man's chest. The father's hands rest on his son's back, one broad and strong, the other frail and almost feminine, a subtle reminder of mercy's dual nature. The light falls softly, illuminating the moment of forgiveness. Everything else is shadow. The fine clothing of the onlookers fades into the dark, the worldly judgments slipping away. Here, in the center, is only reconciliation. Rembrandt tells you that in painting the father's face, he thought of all those he had loved and lost, Saskia, Titus, Hendrickje, and how love in the end matters more than any coin or canvas. Finally, he speaks of himself. In his later years, he painted self-portraits unlike any other artist before or since, over 80 across his lifetime. In the early ones, he appears confident, even swaggering, dressed in rich fabrics and elaborate hats. But as the years wore on, the costumes faded. By the 1650s and 1660s, he painted himself plainly, wrinkles and all. The gaze is steady, sometimes weary, but never self-pitying. In one, his skin is weathered, his eyes shadowed by age, yet there is a spark, a quiet humor, as if he knows life is both fleeting and worth savoring. These were not exercises in vanity. They were acts of honesty, a lifelong conversation with the mirror, ending not in denial of time's passage, but in acceptance. He tells you that the greatest portrait an artist can make is not of a king or merchant, but of themselves as they truly are. Rembrandt's brush moves with a measured confidence as he begins to tell you about one of his earliest triumphs, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicolaes Tulp. It was painted in 1632 when he was only in his mid-20s, newly arrived in Amsterdam and eager to prove himself among the city's most discerning patrons. The painting shows a moment frozen in time. Members of the Amsterdam Guild of Surgeons gathered around the body of a recently executed criminal. The corpse lies diagonally across the canvas, its pale skin almost luminous against the dark surroundings. Dr. Tulp, standing beside the body, holds forceps delicately in one hand, using the other to explain the mechanics of the arm's tendons. Unlike earlier group portraits, where sitters pose stiffly and equally spaced, Rembrandt arranged the men in a dynamic cluster. Some lean forward, their faces caught in sharp relief by the light, intent on Tulp's demonstration. Others look outward, as if aware they are being observed. The composition draws your gaze first to the cadaver, a stark reminder of mortality, then upward to the living, their curiosity and intellect made tangible in the set of their jaws, the glint in their eyes. The contrast between death and learning is deliberate. The body has ceased its function, but in death, it still serves the progress of knowledge. This work made Rembrandt's reputation almost overnight. It showed that he could do more than likeness. He could tell a story, even in a portrait, and in telling that story, he could make you feel the chill of the morgue and the warmth of the candlelight in the same breath. The candles have burned low. The scent of linseed oil and warm beeswax lingers in the air. Outside, the canal is almost black, the lantern reflections trembling on its surface. Rembrandt sets down his brush and for a long moment says nothing. The silence feels full, not empty, like the pause before the final chord of a song. He moves to the window and gestures for you to join him. The air is cool, carrying the faint brine of the sea and the earthy smell of damp stone. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls the hour, each note floating over the rooftops before dissolving into the night. He tells you that painting is like life. You begin with a blank canvas, you lay down shadows, then light, and in the end, you cannot control every stroke. Some edges remain rough, some colors fade, but the work is still yours, still worth making. You stand together in the quiet, the city sleeping around you. The night holds you in its stillness, and as your eyes grow heavy, the memory of candlelight, soft voices, and the slow rhythm of the brush settles over you like a warm blanket. You close your eyes, and the last thing you feel is the calm of a master at work, the calm of a city at rest, the calm of knowing you can drift unhurried into sleep.